Another day, another weight carried, another battle fought. The world never seems to stop. Worries pile up, fears creep in, and sleep feels far away. But what if rest isn't about escaping the chaos? What if it's about trusting the one who never closes his eyes? The sovereignty of God is the pillow upon which the Christian lays his head. God is awake, so you can rest.
I'm Andrew. It's nice to see everybody. So I don't want to big time everybody, but on the At the Park, so Bob Ross, I watched Bob Ross live. I'm just saying, PBS, after school, I'm just saying he's not just a meme to me. It's important. I loved Bob Ross. I always wanted to paint happy little trees. I was never an artist, though. My kids are good artists. I don't understand how that works. Anyway, hi. Okay. That was completely irrelevant. I just thought you should know. Okay. That's it. Okay. This has been a great series. When Manny mentioned it to me a couple months ago, I was really excited because I don't think we think enough about rest and what rest is all about. And so I've really appreciated Manny and Mac showing us that rest in God is really, at the end of the day, about trust in God. And when we trust in Him, we can find that rest in Him. And so, and we can rest in His plans for our lives. We can rest in His providence, and we can rest that He's got this. I want to take it a step further today for us and challenge us, because not only is rest and the idea of rest and Sabbath, not only are they beneficial to us, but they're actually a requirement for us. And so we're going to look at the idea of rest and the Sabbath from something that is really, honestly, pervasive in our culture, and that's the Ten Commandments. You know, the Ten Commandments is all over the place, right? Like, there have been arguments about the Ten Commandments in front of government buildings, and people who are so far away from the Lord, it's not even funny, like, know the Ten Commandments, right? Like, and if you've shared the gospel with enough people, or if you've talked to enough people about eternity and salvation, and you say, hey, if you were to die tonight, why would you go to heaven? Lost person, first thing they're going to go to, well, I haven't murdered anybody. Okay, right? So where do they get that? The Ten Commandments, because they have this idea that, oh, well, if I'm not breaking these 10 things, then I'm good, right? Like, it's like God's top 10 list or something. And honestly, if we ask Christians, unfortunately, for the most part, what's the answer going to be? Why are you going to go to heaven? Well, I go to church. Where do they get that? Once again, the Ten Commandments, the fourth commandment, honor the Sabbath, keep it holy. And so it's this idea that we have that as long as I do these things and check these boxes, I'm going to be good with God. As long as I don't murder somebody, and as long as I go to church, done. Like, God's gonna accept me, and God's gonna want me. And so there's a lot of problems with that, right? If you know the Ten Commandments, I don't know if you've ever been jealous. You got a problem. Anyway, you got a lot of problems if you look at the Ten Commandments. And so thankfully, that's not what the Ten Commandments is all about. And so we're going to hopefully understand a little better this morning about what the point of the Ten Commandments is, but specifically what's the point of the fourth commandment? And so I want us to read that together. So if you turn your Bible to, hang on, Sarah. You'll understand. Page 64. Page 64 in the, if you don't have a Bible, in the Pew Bible. I did it. So page 64 in the Pew Bible. So Exodus chapter 20. And so Exodus chapter 20, the heading tells it all, the 10 Commandments. I'm not breaking news on this. So we're going to focus again on the fourth commandment, which starts in verse 8. So Exodus chapter 20, starting verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You are to labor 6 days and do all your work, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You must not do any work, you, your son or daughter, your male or female servant, your livestock, or the resident alien who is within your city gates. Excuse me. For the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them in 6 days. Then he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and declared it holy. So we read that. Again, we go back and we say, well, okay, well, it's right there. And so it's pretty specific. And so I have to do that. And so if you know anything about Jewish culture and the whole history of Israel, even today, it's about hitting those commands right on. And so Jewish culture, through thousands of years, they have developed laws around the laws. They call it the hedge about the law. It's like a between the hedges for the sad Georgia fans this morning. So to protect you from breaking the law. Okay? An unfortunate example of this, so you may have seen this on the news in the past, but in Mandarin on San Jose Boulevard, five-lane road, right? Big road. There's a synagogue on the east side of the road, and most of the members of the congregation live on the west side of the road. And so on the Sabbath, because they're trying as hard as they can not to break God's law, they can't push the button for the crosswalk. And so the light won't change unless you push the button for the crosswalk. And so over the last, I think it's 5 years, like 3 people were killed walking across the street because they didn't want to break the law and push the button. Okay? And so thankfully the city installed like cameras to see if anybody's standing there so that the light would turn. So since that happened, there haven't been any accidents that I know of. So anyway, so the point of that is, so you're probably sitting there and like, well, that's crazy. Like, why would you do that? It's just pushing a button. But if I look at this, not in the context of the Bible and not in the context of Jesus, it makes sense. Don't do any work. Well, what does that mean, don't do any work? Well, you should be able to see how they could get there, that pushing the button and having to use electricity and stuff, like that's work. So I can't do that. And so if we agree that's taking it too far, well, then the question for us, well, then what's too far? If I have to follow this and say, well, I have to honor the Sabbath, keep it holy, well, what does that mean? Like, what's what's holiness? What's keeping it holy? What's doing no work? Like, so is coming to church like, I did it? I honored the Sabbath? So what matters for us and why we want to spend our time on this and why this relates to what we've been talking about is this idea of Sabbath, and the whole point of the Ten Commandments hinge on Jesus. Remember, God didn't start off with the first part of the Bible. He didn't start out in Genesis and he didn't just take it as it comes, right? He wasn't like, uh-oh, that happened. Let me do some new things, okay? God, when God did this part, he already knew this part, okay? It was all already in God's plan. When God created the heaven and the earth, okay, God already was 3 in 1. It wasn't like God the Father created the heavens and the earth and Jesus and then later the Holy Spirit came along. It doesn't work that way, okay? God is, was, and will be, okay? So God knew the end of the story before he even wrote the beginning, okay? So when we look at the Ten Commandments, we understand that there was a purpose behind them being early in the story so that it would set a stage for the coming of Jesus and Jesus's introduction to humanity. So this term Sabbath, okay, and how it connects to all that we've been talking about over the last month, this term Sabbath is to cease from work, to rest from work. Okay. So God rested from his work. God rested from the work of creation. But what we need to understand is the rest that God took wasn't a nap. Okay? I love sleeping. No, I love sleeping. I will sacrifice anything to go to bed, okay? Like, actually, Lucy stayed up and watched the Alabama-Georgia game. I went to bed, okay? Sorry, Isaac. So, I mean, it was a tight game. I love football, but I'm like, bedtime, gotta go. Like, this is my life, okay? So, sleep is so lovely. God doesn't sleep. On the 6th day, God created Adam, okay? On the 7th day, it says he rested. He wasn't like, woo, this creation thing was tough. I did a great job. I'm going to lay on the heavenly couch. And I'll check in on Adam on day 8 and see how he's doing. That might sound silly, but think about it. God didn't do that, okay? God didn't leave his creation behind and say, I'm it. Like, I made this. Look how good it looks. We'll come back, okay? God has never stopped relating to his creation. God doesn't sleep, and God doesn't leave us to our own devices, okay? You know, there's that idea of like God, the watchmaker, right? Like that God created everything and then like left it. Like, that's nonsense, okay? God has never left his creation behind. So, if that's not what God did on the seventh day, what did he do? God began his relationship with his creation. God began that first step of showing humanity who he is and what this is all about. God reminds us through the Sabbath that we're not defined by our work. We are defined by our relationship with him. We don't come to church on Sunday because that's like God's program, okay? It's not like work 6 days, come to church on seventh day. I hope you don't have to work 6 days a week. Some people do, okay? Most of us work 5. Are we breaking the law? God's law, all of God's law, is for our benefit. It's not some accident. It's not some, oh, they need a rest. Like, God's like, oh, I worked real hard 6 days. I get it. You got to have that day off. You know what I'm saying? God didn't have to require rest in our lives. Think about this. Why do we get tired? Why do we sleep? God created us. God created this thing, okay? God makes the rules. The rule God could have made is they don't need to sleep. Like we could just have no idea what the whole concept of sleep is. We could just always be awake. But God created that for some reason. Just like eating. Whose idea was it that we had to eat stuff? It was God's idea. But why? Is it like, oh, well, I'm going to create a perfect organism, and a perfect organism requires X amount of rest and sleep and this amount of food and water? No, God had a purpose behind it. And so what's that purpose that he had behind it? Well, Jesus tells us the purpose of it. Jesus tells us that he built us this way so that, one, we would have reliance on him, and two, we would have a relationship with him. Because the purpose of needing rest is to remind me that there's somebody out there that doesn't. The purpose of needing food is to remind me that somebody out there doesn't need it. That God doesn't sleep, God doesn't eat, God doesn't do anything except love for me. I mean, that is absolutely profound. I can't underemphasize that this is about love. This idea of rest, this idea of Sabbath is about God's love for me. Matthew 22. Jesus is asked, "Teacher, which command in the law is the greatest?" He said to them, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the greatest and most important commandment. The second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself." Listen to this. All the law and prophets depend on these two commandments. What's the law? The law is the beginning of the Bible, the Hebrew Old Testament. What's the beginning of the commands, of the commandments? The 10 Commandments. The law, the 10 Commandments, including the Sabbath, the idea of rest, hang on love for God and love for neighbor. The 10 Commandments shows us that first picture of what a loving relationship is about. And so Jesus died that we might have that relationship and that we might have that rest in him. Because that's what rest is all about. Rest is about relationship. We honor the Sabbath. We honor rest because we want to relate to him, to be in relationship with him. In Colossians 2:16 and 17, it says, "Therefore, don't let anyone judge you in regard to food and drink or in the matter of a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath day. These are a shadow of what was to come. The substance is Christ." The 10 Commandments is about Jesus. The 10 Commandments is not the top 10 list of rules to follow. It is about how do I, on the basic level, relate to God and relate to others. We can spend a lot of time talking about all the commandments, but at that basic level, just looking at honoring the Sabbath, is about resting in him. Right at the end, Exodus 20:11, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and declared it holy. What is holiness? At its foundation, holiness is rightness with God. My relationship is the Sabbath. We come here not to check a box. If you come here to check a box, I don't know if it's going to hurt our attendance, not necessary. We come here so that we can relate to God. We come here to give space to that relationship. Because in any relationship, the time I spend in it shows its value. If I never spend any time with my wife, do I value our relationship? If we never set any time aside for anything, if we never talk, no. The Sabbath is about holding space for that relationship and saying, you know what? This relationship is important. This relationship is important enough for me to take a step and keep it holy. And the Bible is a series of stories, right? About a people who know God, but forget the relationship. And so it's all about him reminding us that he's God and we're not. When I am physically, emotionally, intellectually exhausted, that's good. You know why that's good? Because there's somebody out there that's not. I break down to remind me that he doesn't. The minute I think I've got it, I got a problem. God is about relationship. So if you want to be closer to God, go to bed. I'm just kidding. But that's why we do it. Think about it. Like, why do we say prayers before we go to sleep? What's the foundation of that? The foundation of that is that realization that if I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take, right? That idea is that I'm going to be asleep. Like, I'm out of it. I hope God's still got all this. He does, right? And so, likewise, for the same purpose, God gave us the Lord's Supper. Why? Because he wants to remind us that we need food. And the idea is, and the metaphor that Jesus always used, was that we need that spiritual nourishment. We need to be in communion with him. It's just like when the Israelites received manna. How often did they receive manna? Every day. God didn't stock them up and say you're good to go. It was the reliance of the people on God, the remembrance of the relationship of God to his people. That's why in the Last Supper, Jesus says what? Do this in remembrance of me. Not as an honorarium, not putting flowers on Jesus' grave, but to remember our relationship with him. And so when we talk about Sabbath, when we talk about rest, the purpose of rest is to remind us of our relationship to him. So when you feel tired, God wants you to go to him. When you feel worn out, when you feel like you're at the end of your rope, that is supposed to drive us to God. He wants that. He wants us to trust him and allow him to take it. And so I want to invite up the deacons, because we're going to transition to the Lord's Supper, that idea of remembering the spiritual nourishment we need from him.